Welcome to Cut to the Crypto, brought to you by Unstoppable Domains. I'm Tony Karen Brown, and I'm your host. This is your 15 minutes of crypto, asked and answered. Hi, today I'm joined by Adam Ryan, CEO of Workweek, and investor. Adam, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Tony, for having me.
It's my pleasure. So I wanted to give a brief overview of Workweek, or rather my understanding of Workweek, so feel free to adjust and correct me in any way that I'm wrong, as I think, mostly because I think this could be a really interesting tie into what we actually want to talk about today. So Workweek launched at the end of 2021. And the way you've described it is a collective of industry experts, writers, creators. And when I first came across your sort of new media model, it reminded me very much of a piece by Packy McCormick about the corporation economy. And he mentions that the individual, I'm quoting here, that the individual is this atomic unit of the internet economy. And you no longer need to be a part of a big corporation, a big company, a big institution to be either relevant or successfully compete with that actual institution. And he mentions that the corporation economy is really what's possible when these individual atomic units recombine in new and interesting ways. And I feel like Workweek is very much the perfect example of this way of thinking and a modern take on a media company, which is what I really wanted to chat with you today. So tied to this idea of the corporation economy, the individuals being at the center, new media companies, I started to think about what does a new relevant media company look like in a Web3 world? And maybe a good place to start here, Adam, is like, what potential opportunities are you seeing with crypto and Web3 as you're building out a new media company? And is that even top of mind for you as you want to stay relevant in this brand new space?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for asking. Also, your summary was pretty great. We're supportive of that kind of narrative. And Packy's an investor in Workweek, and that piece is definitely a big inspiration. And the way that we've thought about this is kind of going back to your point. Is one of our kind of mentors and investors has said, always like think from the very beginning, and not just like what you think is the beginning of the very, very beginning. And for us to build a modern media company that has scale, you have to align incentives. And like, that's the beginning, is like, how do you actually find the best talent where like they're incentivized? And historically, media companies have struggled with two things. I'll touch on the one first and then get to the second one. But one is that creators, like, their talent has simply been arbitraged. And I've been part of this problem. I've ran businesses where if, you have 50,000 readers, you still have two writers, you have 1.5 million readers, and your revenue has 30x, you still only have two writers. Your margins improve. You don't really pay those people like linear as much as their value. And that's wrong. And that started to change a couple of years ago with more and more tools. It's why we saw this unbundling happening with everyone leaving the Times. What people realize is like, there's amazing power in the clout that you have if you have this voice on the internet. But it's really hard to do it on your own. Just like from invoicing to finances to selling ads and contracts, like, how do you not get taken advantage of? I've seen like the worst of stories. And so there's this opportunity a little bit of like, how, if you can align incentives where the best creators feel like they constantly win and they have a journey to work with someone for 10 plus years, you can actually still build a media company. You just have to change those incentives. And so that was the first thing that we started at. And the reason why that's important is because I think like in the ethos of crypto, it is about fairness and like access and democracy. And like, it's not necessarily taking advantage of one or the other, but rather like we all kind of have an equal chance at this thing ourselves and the best person wins. So Workweek started that way to kind of build that out. And then the next thing we looked at was, how do we kind of help these people that are subject matter experts, grow and expand? Packy has worked really hard to become that person. And even still, he's not I tell him this to his face, he's still not reaching his fullest capacity of like economic value. The impact that he has culturally is not even remotely matched the impact he has economically, no matter how big of a fund he raises. It's just not matched. And so what Workweek's trying to do is like, think about how you fix that. And like, how can Nicole Casperson, one of our creators in fintech, how can like every bit of clout that she's earned actually be matched economically? And I think then again, you have to ask yourself about incentives, and audience participation is like how you start to do that, which naturally like Web3 and crypto natively support way more than like anything on a Web2 infrastructure. And you're going to start to see, like, instead of the badges that you got on commenting on Huffington Post's site 10 years ago, you'll start to earn tokens and that by participating in this creator's journey, and together everyone wins.
It's interesting, that piece about A, the incentives, and B, the importance of shifting that dynamic both to the individual creators but also the consumer. So the way I've been thinking about it is users are increasingly expecting more from the companies they work at, the brands they buy from, the communities they join, and potentially also the media and the content that they consume. And is it safe to say that you've already started seeing this, or that, again, this is something that you're thinking about, of if users and consumers overall are expecting more, we're going to have to create opportunities for these users and these consumers of this content to engage, whether that's creating a community around it, whether that's creating new ideas of badges. Is that a thing that is going to be intrinsic in this new Web3 media model of putting that, not only the creator at the center, but the user at the center as well in some way?
You know, I just recently started to shift my mindset on this a little bit in a good way, because of someone I look up to, Jared Dicker, and a panel that we were on last week. And I've always answered this question, and like, really great media companies in the past have had a connection with their audience anyways. Like when I was at The Hustle, like, we could sell out an event space like overnight because like we had the connection with our audience that like they knew it. It could be 48 hours in advance. We were going to sell it out. If we launched a subscription tool, like, right, they would buy it. Like, if we had a community, they would participate. When you have a connection with your audience, like, it created this, like, for the very best media companies, Morning Brew, and like the very best media companies of like modern Web 2 co's, they had this like very clear path of the journey of a user. And you would say like, oh, they're a free user, they're a paid user, they bought a course, they like did this. And Jared pushed me last week to say like, hey, there's going to be a new definition of a user. And I've never really thought about it that way. But if you think about it, like, you start to align tokens and you start to align incentives, like, now you actually have like investor participators. Then you could have like participation of like, they're creating the content that you monetize. You could have participation of like consumption. You actually have to like redefine participation and the user journey, which that is like a shift of mindset for us. It doesn't mean that tactics change. Like, I always believed, no matter what, Web 2 or Web 3, communities and events and courses and like building these in your ecosystem is like what enables a great media company. But viewing those people and how they do that is a different type of category. And then you have to treat them differently.
What I'm hearing, you haven't said this, but what that prompted for me and what I'm hearing also is potentially more responsibility starts to lie with the individual users. And we're slowly starting to see this right now with everything that's going on in the world. And there's so many sources or places I can go to get that information. I've had to take more responsibility of looking at, well, who is this person that's saying this information? Where is this coming from? Is this a trusted person? So what I'm hearing from you is, yes, redefining the users, but also potentially part of that redefining moment is you're going to have more responsibility as a user, which, I don't know, I find that interesting as a concept as well.
Well, and you're just going to go deeper. Like, your users are going to go deeper, but then you have to match that depthness with like, like, and I think about this, like, I started thinking about this in the last week, is like, if I have a board, this is the amount of attention I give my board member. If I have an investor that's 100,000 or $1 million versus 1,000, I treat all of them differently, and they all have like different outcomes and inputs that I get, and outputs and inputs that our relationship exists on. And like, users now need to be seen in the same way in the media world, where it's like, it's about participation and like what classification, where before, the engagement metrics you might use is like, hey, which we would use is like, hey, they open our email 75% of the time. This is like the type of user they are. Hey, they open the email 25%. But now there's a different level of like, almost a more complicated level to think about users that I don't think everyone has quite wrapped their heads around yet.
How is this going to impact, how is everything that we've just talked about going to impact the advertising models? So right now it's like, it's ads or subscriptions. Do you think there's an opportunity here for maybe less of a duality between you have to pick one of the two, and there's maybe a whole new revenue model that appears?
Well, so I think those are different questions. So I definitely think a new revenue model will appear, right?
Okay.
Like I think about like NFTs and what there's no reason NFTs shouldn't be the subscription game.
Yeah.
They just need to have a time frame on them, and like there's now infrastructure being built to do that. Like the reason why they didn't work in the past is like no one wants to sell a lifetime subscription
Yeah.
for $100. That doesn't work, right? So it doesn't make the business model have sustainability. So what, like now creating NFTs through subscription, which allows you to like charge a higher price because they can sell that back 6 months in if they don't like it. Like it changes the way the business works. I definitely believe that like, so there will be new business models that are created off of this. And I think like NFTs are at the forefront there. I'm not a big believer in like micro payments or like micro purchases.
Yeah.
But I do think advertising's not going anywhere. How it's paid and the economics of advertising might evolve. And I think that's like fun to think about is like, can you think about like, okay, is this like almost everything is performance based where if you like purchase this product in the future, do you from this ad, are you airdropped an NFT? So then we know that like you actually qualified. Like, is there like different ways? Like, how do you start to like actually, is that the receipt is like, it actually is performance marketing, but it's your receipt as an airdrop. Like there's like so many things that you could start to think about that like changes how advertising's done. I don't think it's going anywhere because it's been our society for so long. And it's like, I firmly believe it's actually like the bloodline of our economy is advertising. It's how we find out about products to buy. But I do think how it actually is operated and done, it could be in a totally different way.
I like that perspective because I think I've changed my tune on that as well. I used to think, advertising is dead. We now have influencers. And it's like, no, it's just it's still advertising. Let's not kid ourselves. It's just a different form of, same thing, different means.
Yeah. And we talked about Packy and like, he does an amazing job, in my opinion, of advertising. He charges super high price and like, and it's premium quality, but he only does people that like he likes. And like, there's a certain scale problem there, but then it's a scale of like in comparison of like, well, what if you just create a collective of creators that you only allow them to work with advertisers that they want, but you have 100 of them? That's scale, which is kind of how Workweek got going.
And maybe one last question on the collective piece that you just brought up there. You mentioned how, whether it was the Hustle or Morning Brew, you could, the brand in of itself, there was that level of trust and relationship with the audience that you could, fill an audience or whatever it was. Was that tied to the brand, the overarching company? Was that tied more to all of the journalists that sit inside that organization? And how is that shifting in a collective model?
Yeah, it's a really good idea. Really good point. I think names are like people are coming to the forefront. PFPs are coming to the forefront.
Oh, that's a nice segue. I like that.
I think it's way more individual based. I actually think if you're like leaning really hard into like your institutional name and you're almost hiding the names of the people that create that, it's going to be, I think that brand love is going away in media because people want to know where the information came from. It's not like you're buying shoes. Like you don't care, but like when you write something, you're like, well, where did this come from? What are the bias? And I think like that's been a shift in society is no matter if you're in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, like very well researched journalist to like a Substack the person that does it as a side hustle, everyone has their bias. And like, I think that's like the realization that's happened in the last 5 years. And now people want to know where that comes from. And then if you trust that and you believe in it, you love it. And then, but you don't love the brand, you love the individual that you trust. So that's kind of where I think that's going.
Which is a great place to end on, of just like if that power shift and dynamic has shifted to the individual, it means that if that person leaves the company, they also leave with more than what they used to maybe leave with previously. And that could be not just an email list, but that can be that relationship and that trust that you've built over the years, which again, I think ties in really nicely with crypto and Web3.
Yeah.
Is there anything else to add?
100%.
Sorry, go for it.
No, it's just like it changes lifestyle. Like my big thing is like, I actually believe you no longer like there are opportunities if you're creating the internet where you work 5 to 7 hours a week and you make $1 million a year. Like there's no doubt. If your influence is like high enough, you can like make it. Now, other people I know, like Mario Gabriel is an amazing solo creator. He puts 50 hours into probably every piece at least, right? So like everybody's different of the time consumption, but like I do think people can start to choose their lifestyle and not be constrained. And there's like a whole nother happiness thing there that like can start to be enabled because of that.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much, Adam. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
of course.
this.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and I hope you enjoyed today's guests as much as I did. If you've got big crypto questions, send them our way and we'll attempt to get them answered for you. And for the more seasoned crypto investors and enthusiasts, do go check out our weekly podcast, The Unstoppable Podcast, to learn more about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web.